Hello and welcome back to another episode of LMS Cast. I'm Chris and I'm joined by a special guest, Kurt Von Onen. He's back on the show, and today we're going to go over the world of continuing education, doing it in WordPress, and really get into the opportunity of continuing education and how to think about it, how to do better at it, whether you're a continuing education provider or an agency who's assisting a continuing education provider with delivering the product. But first, welcome to the show, Kurt.
Chris, yeah, it's amazing. Dude, I'm so glad to be back. It's always fun to chat with you.
Awesome. Yeah, and this is good stuff because you have a lot of experience with continuing education clients at Mañana No Mas and a lifter. For over a decade, we know that the people that are the most successful with our product are in the continuing education niche. That doesn't mean you can't be successful if you're a coach, a course creator, or a school. But based on what we know from our interviews and everything, the continuing education platforms that are successful are sometimes very successful financially and also in terms of the impact and reach they have. One of the first things I wanted to ask you, you had a great insight on differentiating the difference between corporate training and continuing education. So I like where you went with that. So tell us how you see those things as being different but very related.
So I think that's interesting, actually, Chris, because I don't know that a lot of people would see things the way that I see things, but it's because I've had the benefit of being like, I was the corporate training manager. I am the agency owner, and I'm a course creator. So I have the view, the perspective of all three. And when you are making continuing education, you are basically a corporate trainer, but it's under contract. And a lot of people just don't make that connection. They don't really they think corporate training is this weird, sterile, like some other kind of platform, some other weird thing that they're taking where it's mandatory training or whatever. And then they think that like continuing education is some kind of other product. And then we think of course creators as being like this like soft, cuddly, like I'm really committed to this. This is my passion, and I want to share like knitting with you, right? Well, there's like a lot of overlap
Yeah.
between those things, and continuing education to me is corporate training. It's corporate training under contract. You're doing it to certify people for another realm of expertise somewhere.
And it's also course creation, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of the services that we offer at Mañana No Mas deal with not just course creation, but we think of like, course authorship, or we think of instructional design, or whatever the phrase is you want to put on it. But a lot of times we deal with clients that have some kind of overarching, like large training content. And maybe it's some kind of legacy content that they had before, but they need to figure out like, how do we take this legacy content and how do we chop it into pieces so that it could be like micro learning that fits in the modern learning environment. And then when we take that large legacy content and we cut it down into those pieces, and we make that's what becomes, for this conversation, that's what becomes the continuing education, right? It's like, okay, so we can take this giant course, we can block this down into 3 courses with micro learning lessons, and then the summation of those lessons become a course tract, which become a certificate, and then they take that every year or every 2 years, and that becomes the recertification to stay within that industry. And it's gosh, I just realized everything I said probably sounds like a foreign language to a lot of people watching or listening, but that's like how continuing education works. It's a major corporation or a major vertical in an industry is saying we require a certain amount of education and a certification for people to be qualified to do something. And then you have to create something online that says, yes, I have taught them and I have validated their expertise, and here's their certificate. And then that certificate needs to be renewed every 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years based on whatever the continuing education requirement is. And Lifter LMS with the new continuing education add-on, just, I mean, it nails it perfect, Chris.
Yeah, and we just did an episode on validation. And this is one of those things like I knew before we created continuing education specific software add-on for Lifter LMS that it was going to be a home run because you know what? These people showed up 10 years ago. They were using Lifter LMS to deliver continuing education. Through all our interactions, we knew what their pain points were. We knew how to better serve things like credit tracking, expiring access and recertification, making sure the certificate was perfect for what people who take continuing education, like my father who worked in pharmacy, he still maintains his pharmacy license even though he's retired. And my entire life, I've heard my dad say, "Oh, I got to go take a CE course," and he would go to a hotel conference room, and then they started doing some online, and then during COVID they did more online, and it's a thing that's been around forever. Like so many licenses, like nursing, doctors, different healthcare positions,
Mortgages.
real estate,
Yeah.
banking, all this stuff.
Dentistry.
Sure, yeah, it keeps going. And it's kind of funny you mentioned dentistry because, uh, if somebody is just, I've always heard it in the online business space or really just entrepreneurship space, is if you can get a dentist as a client, you can do really well because they, financially, every time, I don't know about you, every time I go to the dentist, I'm shocked at the bill. And the dentist is, there's a nice car outside and, they're doing well. But basically what I'm saying is there is a lot of money in continuing education, and it's also a recurring problem. I say problem in the sense that just like my father, he had to get 15 hours or credit hours, whatever, every single year for an entire career. And by the way, there's a lot of pharmacists on planet Earth, and that's just one niche, the pharmacy continuing education need.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, that drives me, but I'm always struck on these talks that you and I have, how that comes to like personal experiences. But think about Dr. Obi that I've mentioned to you, right? She's I think she's skillsmadeeasy.com or whatever. By the way, I am very good at doing sutures with SCORM, by the way. She has a SCORM related course. It's continuing education, and it's all about like every couple of years, nurses in the field have to recertify in how to properly suture a patient. And so her course is like how to properly suture a patient. And so we have a SCORM related course. It's continuing education. Every couple of years, people got to dive back in, get recertified. And the idea that the platform tracks the expiration dates, when they're due again, sends them a notification that says you've got to recertify, and resells the course again. It just kind of keeps that recurring income thing going from a business perspective. But it's deeper than that. Like, you didn't create a course on suturing people and being in the medical field unless you were attracted to that in the first place, and that's somewhat of a passion for you. So if you're the course creator that went that direction, you now have a platform that takes care of your passion and treats your people well and keeps people on time, keeps them certified, keeps them working, keeps them employed, and keeps them making their money. And that's like such a cool thing.
Yeah, and the other thing too is like in all these industries, whether it's pharmacy or other
Yeah.
healthcare or real estate, there's technology and like everything is just changing. So there's retaking things the way a lifeguard needs to have a CPR, the same CPR
Yeah.
training every year and so on. But there's also industries like I'm sure the pharmaceutical continuing education, a lot of it's changed in the past 30 years, and there's just a lot of new drugs and technology and illness, understanding of illness and disease and things like that. It's a constantly evolving. So not only do they have to re-up every year, they have to stay current on their changing industry. So it's a very sticky business that's
Yeah.
like essential.
I am a mountain bike coach with the NICA organization. So we work with students between fifth grade this year, fifth grade and 12th grade on mountain biking. And that sounds like, oh, you're a volunteer. You're a volunteer mountain bike coach. That's got to be great. No, it's a pain in the butt. I have to certify every year on like, you're not alone with the student. There's always an adult present. You don't touch kids in weird ways. You like, and then once you get past all that, then it comes into this is how you ride a mountain bike. This is how you go over a rock. This is how you go over a route. And so you have to do this certification every year to be qualified to be able to volunteer and work with these kids. And just from the standpoint that sometimes when we talk about these e-learning projects, we talk about it from a revenue standpoint or from a money standpoint or from a career standpoint. And sometimes it really is just as simple as I just want to volunteer and add value to people. But you have to be qualified to be able to put yourself in those spaces. And that's what continuing education helps us do.
Yeah. What else makes them so sticky? I mean, part of it is that it's not in some ways it's direct to consumer because but it's not really because a lot of times, like in your case, even though you may have to it depends on whether the business or the individual has to pay for the CE or continuing education,
Yeah.
but there's usually like a business or a licensing body or a corporation or something that requires this thing. So it's very much a much more of a business-like version of e-learning. It's very business heavy in terms of
That's
like the transaction. Like I'm doing this to keep my job, but also to be the best I can do at my career, which is the work I do. It's my career.
See, that's the weirdest thing about continuing education is as you create your continuing education courseware, you're not really sure who your customer is. And I'm just throwing that out there honestly, right? So for instance, um, when I want to be a mountain bike coach, I'm the mountain bike coach. I got to do it, period. I just got to do it, right? If I am a mortgage broker and I want to keep my mortgage licensing active, I've got to pay to take those courses and be certified and do those things. If I want to be a real estate broker, if I want to be a dentist, I've got to pay for those things. But there's the other side of the coin, and that is like the continuing education that was like my previous life when I was the training manager for Ducati and Suzuki. Well, when I worked for Ducati and likewise when I worked for Suzuki, those companies paid for the training for all of the technicians to be able to update their licenses, right? So to be able to say, yeah, I'm fully qualified to work on this year, make, and model of motorcycle so that I can do warranty work in these areas. And so when you get into the continuing education um, vertical of e-learning, you have to understand who is your customer, who's actually going to pay you, and how do you approach those people? Which, Chris, I'm going to make it sound like a commercial, but I can't help myself. Lifter LMS has continuing education, but it also has the groups feature. And so if you can combine continuing education and groups, well, now you're not just selling to individuals, you can sell to those groups. And then the people that manage those groups externally of the LMS, right? So say somebody at Ducati wants to do training for 2,500 technicians, they can buy 2,500 seats of training. They can buy a group, invite their 2,500 students, continuing education, and manage all of it through a page on the front of Lifter LMS. I don't know of another LMS that lets me do that out of the box without custom development. And that's just me, like me being like totally both feet in with the Lifter LMS thing. I know I'm biased, but I mean, you guys are knocking it out of the park. It's great.
Well, I appreciate that. And I just want to say, like, sometimes because Lifter LMS is built on WordPress in continuing education markets, it seems too good to be true from a price point because it's relatively cheaper than some other software as a service that's super expensive with these enterprise contracts and all these things. It's like, well, how is that possible at Lifter LMS price points to get all that and much more customizability and everything? And I realized that it's because a lot of the costs are not embedded in the product. So what I mean by that is because WordPress is open source software with a whole ecosystem, just the WordPress core software that has been built as an open source project. Now there are people that are paid to work on that from different organizations to kind of sponsor the the common core software that we all use and build on top of. But if WordPress core was a private company, it would be hundreds of millions or billions of dollars to build what has become the WordPress core. But because the foundation is that open source software with a huge ecosystem of community contribution, some paid, some unpaid, that's part of the reason why the price is so approachable to what some continuing education providers see as a sticker shock, not the bad kind, but the low kind. It seems too good to be true, but it just takes an understanding of the WordPress open source community project. And then, uh, what things like Lifter LMS does on top of that, it's affordable, but don't mistake that price for being a lack of effort and skill and contribution put into the underlying software.
I feel like you are goading me. I
Okay.
feel like you're
I'm
dragging me
not.
into the conversation, Chris.
I'm not goading you.
Um, so let's just have it out, right? So the people that are listeners and viewers that are watching LMS Cast now, I'm just going to say it. When I was the corporate trainer at Ducati, at Suzuki, I did work with BRP, with Triumph, I mean, we're talking about big companies. I'm in charge of their budgets. I'm literally the guy that has to like write the purchase order to buy whatever the next year's maintenance and hosting is for the e-learning package. And this is why I came to Lifter LMS in 2014, 15. When I was watching our company spend $400,000 on hosting and maintenance for e-learning, but still ran a department of 6 people to manage the e-learning, that didn't make any sense to me because think this through, right? If you have 6 people on salary, even if they're 100 grand a year, that's $600,000. So that's 600 grand a year just for salaries to manage the content of the learning, and then 400 grand a year that we're spending on maintenance and hosting. And that was for these like weird, like SCORM specific custom learning platforms. And for a lot of companies, especially in the continuing education space, this seems to be kind of true, where they're paying anywhere from $75,000 to $250,000 a year for hosting and maintenance. They're still responsible for all of the content. Chris, part of why I got so excited and why I relaunched Mañana no Mas the way I did when I left Suzuki is because I looked at that and I said, those numbers, the math ain't mathin'. The math ain't mathin'. If I can have really good hosting, I mean, even if I pay $3,000 a year for hosting for a company with 2,500 students, I mean, let's go crazy. Let's just say I need the best hosting I can possibly get. I'm going to pay $3 grand a year for the hosting. Lifter LMS is $1,500 a year. I'm at $4,500. Okay, I'm nowhere near $400,000.
Right.
And so that is where my head went. And then as I began to relaunch Mañana no Mas and help people, transfer their SCORM content to WordPress and use Lifter LMS and do things in different ways, and I realized that this call might be going a different direction than what we originally said. To me, it was for an agency perspective, it was a whole other market to look at. And the weirdest part is when you talk to people and you say, hey, you're currently paying $300,000 a year for your e-learning platform. I can do it for 60 grand a year. It sounds like for people in the WordPress space, 60 grand a year seems like a lot of money. But for people in the e-learning space, 60 grand a year sounds like it's too good to be true. It can't possibly be good. And what we're actually delivering is a learning management system surrounded by a content management system that gives us a premium student experience and gives us the ability to add features to our LMS that corporations haven't had in years. And it's the same with continuing education. A lot of continuing education people are still locked into finding a platform that will run SCORM, which means they're learning at Learn Upon, Bridge, Blackboard, things like that. And so they're looking at these other platforms instead of realizing, hey, I could move this over to WordPress, surround it with a complete CMS, put marketing information and blogs around it, add community features for learners if that's what my client needs. And I can give them a much better experience for, I don't know, 40%, 35% of what their initial budget was.
Yeah.
I went crazy. I'm sorry.
No, that's good. It's mind blowing. I appreciate the way you frame that in. I want to talk a little bit about like the who is involved in continuing education. One of the thing I've noticed in Lifter LMS community is that I've seen this pattern enough times that I see it as a pattern. Sometimes people work in a job that require continuing education, and maybe they ultimately kind of have that moment where they realize they want to become an entrepreneur, they want to do their own thing, and they're probably kind of far along in their career. They've mentored a lot of people in their job, and maybe they think that, you know, the continuing education that they're getting, that they have to take, they're not that happy with it, and they have this idea like, you know what, I think I could do a better job, or do a good job and make continuing education for my industry, which, by the way, I really understand because I've been doing it for 20 years or whatever. And I've watched so many entrepreneurs pivot from employee to continuing education provider, and they get going with WordPress and Lifter LMS. And then the funny other pattern that I see a lot of them say is something like, geez, I'm not great at marketing, but this business is so successful, and I'm not even good at sales, or I'm barely even selling, or I do something like when it's time in a certain niche to get your CE, you go to your licensing board, and they have like approved providers, and you kind of have a menu of companies that you can source your continuing education from that are like approved. Like I know someone who did something where their entire marketing strategy was, they went to the board. The board was like, "Oh, that's awesome. We need some new fresh content in the space. Can I get, you know, access to see what you got?" The content gets reviewed, and they're like, "This is great. We're going to add you to the list." And that is the entire marketing strategy, and it works. And building huge, these entrepreneurs, kind of like ex-employee entrepreneurs, or maybe they're transitioning out of their active role. I've watched them become CE providers, and it's fascinating.
I People are going to get mad, but that to me is like the who you know, not what you know situation. There's a lot of who you knows that really find great success in the e-learning space because, to your point, they've become experts in the field. They're tired. So I come from a technical background, working on cars, working on motorcycles, working on diesel trucks, airplanes. I have an aviation background. And so what happens is a lot of these people, their backs hurt. I mean, they're just tired. Their
Yeah,
bodies are tired. But through 20 years or 30 years of working in an industry,
that
they
they care about, that they
yeah,
love.
that they
Yeah,
care about, that they love. They end up knowing, you know, the fixed operations director of X, Y, and Z, right? And they go, you know what? I really think I could just create a course about this and teach people how to do what I do without me having to do it all the time. And it's a really good exit strategy for some people to get out of the whole idea of, you know, um, in the power sports field, the best mechanic in the shop, like the most knowledgeable, wonderful, most awesome mechanic in the repair center is probably the worst person to be the service writer and the service manager in the service department. I mean, it just doesn't work, right? Because you're taking someone from the physical hands-on portion of it, and you're trying to squeeze them into a relationship position with customers. And a lot of times that doesn't work. But if that person with a high tech background says, you know what, I could make technical training that shows other technicians how to do what I've done for the last 20 years and kind of shortcut the pains and the mistakes that I've made. If I could take the 20 years of mistakes out and just give them the highlights, I could help them fast forward their own progression through the space. Those are the people that come up with really good courses, that seem to be able to sell things really well to people at the higher levels.
Yeah, and a funny thing happens when you kind of make the pivot from employee to entrepreneur is you wake up one day and you realize, oh my gosh, now I'm just as busy and I'm just as overworked and stuff. But then there's something else interesting I've seen with these continuing education providers is they will start partnering or paying a subject matter expert to come in. They've figured out like Lifter LMS and like how to actually do it. They will license content to include in their courses, maybe not the whole course, but
Yeah.
like we need this piece or this template to show people. And so they start building team around the project, and that could just be outsourced content or whatever. I see some of them. There's also a huge opportunity with continuing education is sort of a slow moving industry that takes a while to catch up. So it took the COVID pandemic to cause or to basically force the CEU. You can't just stop, like you got to get your hours. So it kind of forced it to go more online, which was a part of Lifter LMS and other continuing education industry tool growth because of COVID. But the transition from continuing education being delivered in hotel conference rooms or in business parks or corporate offices and things to online is still very much unfolding. If you're very tech forward, you may think it's all already been done, everybody's online. No, they're still going to these conference rooms. So sometimes all you have to do, and this is part of my story with Lifter and starting in the organic gardening. My whole strategy with the permaculture thing that I did back in 2012 or whatever was to actually go to this education thing. This wasn't actual continuing education. It was more classic course creator world. But I would show up with my video camera. I would take the offline world, bring it online, make it available to the whole world through the internet. So like there's lots of great educators who operate in the continuing education world that have no interest in starting their own continuing education company, but would be glad to contribute to somebody else's continuing education platform, ideally getting paid either a one-time fee or a royalty or something like that. So you don't have to do it alone. And I also notice a lot of times, this is a classic setup, not just in continuing education, but all the e-learning niches. I've seen this so many times. There's a partner, like a husband, wife, or whatever, and one of them's a tech person and one of them's a subject matter expert. So they'll work together. Like I'm thinking of one continuing education platform where the wife is the subject matter expert, has all those connections you're talking about, knows all the speakers, used to organize the conferences, also worked in the field of that industry. But the husband is like the tech person and they bring it all together so that as a husband and wife, they start this continuing education company and one person isn't trying to do it all. You can pull it off. I've seen it done where you can have a one person continuing education business, but more likely than not, there's a couple players involved, somebody to manage the tech, the subject matter experts, the business strategy, and so on. And or like they can do all that except for the tech and they work with an agency to like bring it all together for them. They've already decided on the value of WordPress and Lifter LMS and this continuing education features and certification and all that. So if you're excited about this, you don't necessarily have to do it all alone. I just want to put that out there.
As you were talking, Chris, it really took me back to my experience 2013, 14, 15 with Ducati. And when I originally went to Ducati, they had a contractor based training system, meaning everything was external. So if you were a Ducati dealership and you wanted to train your technicians, you had to send your technicians to whatever city the training was in, right? And so there was training for people to go to, and they would go to a live training. It was typically 2 weeks long, and it was theory and practicum. It was theory and workshop oriented stuff. And then when I got the job with Ducati, my job was to, how do we bring this, all this contract training, how do we bring this into an in-house platform that makes sense, right? And so this is an example of what continuing education could be for somebody. To just let you know the benefits to the main company and to the people getting the training. What we did was we took all of the theory from the classroom, and we put it into an online platform. That online platform was, people could learn at their own pace. It was DIY, baby. It was, you go in, you train at your own pace. That's fine. And then you test and you quiz, and we make sure you know what you're talking about before you come to the in-person practicum. So for a lot of continuing education platforms, hybrid training is the thing. So there's going to be something online and something in person. So what I want people to realize is the old system had people traveling for 2 weeks at a time. So that's hotel, rental car, per diem, meals, the whole thing, right? And then, so we took the training and we said, let's put all of the theory online. And then we said, let's do a practicum course in person where we just really highlight the features from the online training. And then we take people into a workshop and we put tools in their hands and we say, okay, show us what you learned. Like, shim this crank, set the gap on these intake valves, set the gap on these exhaust valves, there was all these things. And we said, you have to do all these things. They would do all these things, and then we would take a final test and they would pass. Now, for corporations that are listening and viewing this podcast, what that amounted to was, we cut the training budget in half, and then we certified twice as many technicians in that year. So we went from a model that was twice as expensive and certified half as many people to a system that was half as expensive and certified twice as many people. And that was from using online tools. And now think of that moving forward. So if you think about it moving forward from a recertification standpoint, if they've already been in person to certify, like they know how a torque wrench works and know how a T-handle works, they know how these feeler gauges work, you don't have to bring them back for the impracticum personal thing. Now you just have to refresh them electronically. So all that expense is gone. All the per diem, all the travel, all the nonsense is off the spreadsheet. And all you're worried about is paying for the online platform and the cost to make the content. And in Ducati's case, it ended up being a huge win.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, that a lot of continuing education is not 100% online, but that doesn't mean none of it is.
Yeah.
Just like in my father's case with pharmacy, even still, like there's a certain percentage or number of hours per year that have to be in person, and that's okay. It doesn't mean the online version won't work. And I also want to just mention, like in a past episode, we talked about validation, and sometimes you need to pivot on the who you're selling to. So for example, if you work in the legal field or the real estate field, and you're trying to like, here's a real estate example. Let's say you're trying to sell a course to real estate agents and it's doing okay, but not doing great. If you kind of pivoted to like, wait a second, let me look at the National Association of Realtors or my state chapter of that, because real estate agents have continuing education requirements. I'm going to take the same knowledge I have, I might package it a little differently for the CE market instead of direct to agent, and I'll go through the need in the existing river of demand that recurs every year to keep a real estate license. That one pivot can make a dramatic impact. So if you're a course creator, I would, no matter what the niche is, I would just ask yourself the question, is there value in what I teach to some kind of continuing education market that is out there hungry for training uh, on repeat every year?
Your phrase of what, what's more efficient, one-to-one sales or one-to-many sales? Every time you say that, it shortcuts the whole thing about continuing education. It's like, do I wanna sell one-to-one or do I wanna sell one-to-many? Do I wanna talk to a person and sell them 1 course, or do I wanna talk to a person and sell them 50 examples of that course,
Yeah.
right? And that to me is like, okay, I'm seeing it. Like, I'm starting to get it, so now how do I leverage that? And then it just becomes a thing.
And then there's also another exponential multiplier here, which is a lot of this continuing education stuff. You if you think really big, like I may work at one hospital as a nurse and I get excited about continuing education, and then I figure out my state or my hospital system's need for continuing education. But then there's more hospitals. And in the United States, there's 49 more states who may have like slightly different requirements. I'm not saying it's easy to rinse and repeat, like, oh, I did it in Ohio. Now I'm going to do it in South Dakota. But the scale of where you can go with this is pretty impressive because continuing education and licenses tend to be subdivided by state boundaries, as an example, or even different countries have different requirements, or maybe uh, when you figure out a model and then you can change the geography, you could potentially change the language, like, oh, maybe I'm going to hire somebody to come into my organization to do this in Spanish, and then we'll go after the Spanish speaking continuing education market for the people that are in the exact same role as the English speaking world. And it just goes, when you start seeing all these like layers of how you could expand, it's really interesting. But sometimes, like with a lot of these that I've seen, the entrepreneur gets to the point where they don't need to expand. They're kind of like, I'm good. I've I'm making enough here. I've been able to pivot from employee to entrepreneur. I built a team. We're doing well. Everybody's making enough money. We're good. But there really is, I'm not saying unlimited upside, but there's a lot of upside potential for um, just taking it to a slightly different market, or even or different geography, different language, different niche even. Because like some industries operate very similar, um, like I'm trying to think of a specific example. There could be something that happens in a lawyer continuing education that's also relevant to like a judge or court system continuing education, or something that uh, the person who ends up needing that is in a slightly different role. There's just all these pivots that are just like stacked up and ready to be tested if you have the capacity, desire, and ability to expand.
We're so disconnected. My brain went right to bartending.
Okay.
So I have a client that has a bartending course.
Do bartenders do continuing education?
Turns out that bartenders have continuing education. And in the
See?
state of California, you have to be certified to be a bartender.
Okay.
I wasn't aware of this. So one of the things I did as an agency was I connected the state of California's website to our customers Lifter LMS website. So people actually register through the state of California. They get their student ID. That student ID becomes part of their Lifter LMS ID, blah, 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 blah. And it goes on.
Yeah.
But to your point, that client recognized that California is not the only state that requires a certification for that. And so they've worked with other states, and we've created automations for them that connect the Lifter LMS reporting data to those sponsored states, if that's the way to say that, so that the states sell the training, he gets the revenue, the reporting goes back to those states, and the states get copies of their certifications with every recertification, and they have to be recertified every 2 years.
Yeah. And you
It's
just,
amazing. It's just an ATM machine after that.
and I just thought of another pivot, which is like public sector, private sector,
Oh,
government sector. Like, for example, like doctors or nurses, there's like different sectors. Like, there's also nurses in the military who need training, right? And maybe I'm not an expert in military medicine, but they're still nurses, they're still doctors, they still need their stuff. And, the governments do contracts all the time where they're not everything is provided 100% in-house.
yeah.
So all these pivots or just verticals pop up. Once you kinda nail one, you can obviously stay with it, perfect it, but look around a little bit and see where else you can expand into.
Land and expand.
That's it. So if you're looking to land and expand and you're intrigued by this, I want to encourage you to check out Lifter LMS and the continuing education. I do want to mention our continuing education add-on works no matter what you call it. So this is part of the software and all our research and everything. You can rename it to CME, continuing medical education, PDUs, professional development units, or whatever there's a lot of lingo and vernacular in all this. But sort of like Kurt was saying in the beginning of this episode, it's very similar to corporate training. It's all like not as different as you think. It's just more about the application and the use case and the purpose and who you're selling to and how they need their certificates and stuff. But at the end of the day, it's still courses that have, continuing education attached to them. So check out Lifter LMS. If you want an agency to help you with this, Kurt's got a very unique set of experience as a education provider himself, as a manager, a leader, a trainer, as a website, WordPress, Lifter LMS, CEU niche, massive amounts of experience in all of that. So check out Mañana No Mas for that. And we want to hear from you. I love interviewing on this podcast continuing education entrepreneurs because their stories are so cool, not just because they build great businesses, but it's often a lot of lifestyle stuff. Like, you know what? Just like Kurt said, I've been in this industry for 30 years. I either wasn't financially ready to retire, or I just didn't want to stop working. I still love my industry, or I wanted to figure out how to do a business with my partner or my friends and make it happen. I've seen it in my local community where like doctors are conspiring on, we need to get in this continuing education game. I'm like, guys, I got a learning management system over here. Let's talk about this. And they're like, oh, you know about that stuff? I'm like,
Oh, you know
yeah, I do. So check out Lifter LMS, check out Mañana No Mas. And if you have questions about building a continuing education platform or how any of this works, check it out. If you're sitting on a backlog of SCORM content, as an example, we have a whole free course on the Lifter LMS Academy, how to integrate with that. We also teach you, if you want to do hybrid, like if you're moving away from SCORM and you want to kind of use a more modern WordPress content management system for creating your e-learning, we show you how to kind of ride in both worlds. Anything's possible. But thank you, Kurt, for coming back on the show. We really appreciate it. And reach out to Lifter LMS and Mañana No Mas with any kind of continuing education question. We're kind of unique in the space, and that we've really been around this industry for a long time in a lot of different angles, and have seen people, even from the very early days of Lifter LMS, which is 2013, immediately start using it for continuing education and our certificate system and making it work. Fast forward 12, 13 years, it's now super set up and frictionless for continuing education. And I just would love to see you use it. Check it out. Thank you so much, Kurt, for coming on the show. We will do this again down the road.